Hey, what's up, people? Welcome to my review and in-depth analysis for Terminator Salvation, a film that is directed by McG. Yeah, so Terminator Salvation, I kind of have, I don't want to say a love-hate relationship with this movie, but I will definitely say that there are things about this movie that I really appreciate, while simultaneously I can acknowledge that there are some significant shortcomings for this movie. Now, one thing that I really appreciate about Terminator Salvation is the tone. I really love the return to the serious tone. One thing that I appreciate about Terminator Salvation is that it takes itself seriously, unlike Terminator 3, which I felt, I don't know, it just felt like it had too much comedy that was kind of inappropriate. And one thing that I really disliked about Terminator 3 was the score, the soundtrack. It sounded like it belonged in a Back to the Future kind of movie. But here, the soundtrack, the score is way better and sounds more appropriate for the Terminator series. And another thing that I really appreciate about Terminator Salvation is that it's a different take on the series. It's not the same thing over and over again with Arnold Schwarzenegger being sent back in time, etc., etc. Here, we focus on the future war, something that Terminator fans have long desired. And I really love the different approach. It felt fresh, and I appreciated that. Now, in a way, this film kind of feels like Aliens. Like, instead of having one Terminator, two Terminator, we have many Terminators, right? And I think this allows the filmmakers a good opportunity to explore different ways to thrill us, right? So, like I said, it's similar to Aliens. In the first Alien film, you had only one alien. But in the sequel, you had numerous aliens. And this just opened up a whole new can of worms for how to thrill us. Suspense. And another thing that I appreciate about Terminator Salvation is the world building, right? We see some things that Kyle Reese talked about only through dialogue exposition in the first Terminator film. Such things as the T-600 being clunky and stuff. And we get to see that. And I thought that was really, really awesome. Right? Now, even though there's these things that I really appreciate about this film, there are some things as far as the directing that I find questionable. Some artistic decisions just feel haphazard. Right? And even in regards to the plot. Right? Now, I watched this movie and a part of my brain is like, wow, I really appreciate the intensity, the tone. I like that they're taking it serious, right? You feel like there's this sense of urgency throughout the film. But then the other side of my brain, the analytical side, the one that scrutinizes the logistics to the film, is just kind of like, well, wait a minute. This doesn't make any sense. Namely, this. So Skynet goes through this complicated plot involving this new character who is half human, half cyborg, this Marcus character, in order to lure John Connor to its location, right? Using the infiltrator, Marcus. Instead of using the infiltrator to just kill John, right? And same thing with Kyle Reese. So Skynet, number 1 and 2 targets are John and Kyle, right? And Skynet uses this infiltrator to lure Kyle and John to its whatever, Northern California headquarters, right? But that makes no sense because why not just use Marcus, the infiltrator, to kill John and Kyle? I mean, you literally see Marcus hanging out with Kyle Reese in LA, in the ruins of LA. Like they're just chilling, right? I mean, they even spend a couple of nights together. So why not just kill him in his sleep, right? And the reason for that is because Marcus doesn't know that he is a cyborg, right? So that's kind of a spin on the previous films where like the Terminator knew it was programmed to kill John, to kill Kyle, but this cyborg, this Terminator, I guess, Marcus doesn't know it's a Terminator, right? And that it just doesn't make much sense. I feel like there should have been more thought put behind this idea, right? Maybe get rid of this whole idea altogether. Like, why does there have to be this twist where Skynet is like, oh, see, I programmed you to indirectly bring Kyle and John Connor to me so that I can kill them. And it's like that. If that wasn't in the film, it would have been fine. Like, Marcus could have just been an experiment, right? An unfinished experiment. And he just has to live with the fact that he is kind of like a Terminator, right? And he just didn't know it, right? And that would have been fine. That still would have been interesting. Now, coming back to something good about the film, and in regards to Marcus, which I will elaborate on later in this review, is this whole transhumanism theme. And I really appreciate it, right? Because I think things like that, themes involving transhumanism, are fascinating, right? I mean, you see this in films that I love, such as Blade Runner, and series such as Ghost in the Shell, which I absolutely adore. And that's one thing that I really appreciate about Terminator Salvation, is that we get that theme in this movie through the Marcus character, which I found, interesting. However, this whole twist, again, with Skynet using Marcus to lure John and Kyle to its Northern California headquarters so they can be killed, was just unnecessary. And it's complicated in a way that's stupid, right? It's not complicated in the way like a Christopher Nolan movie where you scrutinize it deeper and then it makes sense, right? This is just like, no, this is bad writing, in other words, right? But moving forward, I'm just going to go back and forth between things I loved about this movie and some things that I found were just kind of questionable and are definitely shortcomings in regards to this film. Now, I like the opening of this movie a lot. We see Marcus on death row, and it feels fresh. It feels like something new. Because in Terminator 1, Terminator 2, and Terminator 3, the films open up basically in the same way, with Terminator or a human being sent back in time, right? But here we open up to this whole new opening, this whole new introduction of this character, Marcus, who we know absolutely nothing about. He's on death row. His body is about to be donated to Cyberdyne, who creates Skynet. He's on death row because he killed 2 cops, and I presume his brother died as collateral damage to this conflict. And I like the line when he kisses the doctor who he signs the agreement with, in which he's going to donate his body. He kisses the doctor who has cancer, and then he says, so that's what death tastes like, right? Interesting stuff, right? And then later on, as the movie progresses, another thing that I found very interesting, and we see this in the opening, I guess you want to say subtitles, right? Where it introduces this notion, this idea that not everybody follows John Connor, right? That there are some who believe that John Connor is a false prophet, right? And I thought, hey, wow, that's an interesting idea. And at the same time, this John Connor, since this is kind of like a sequel to Terminator 3, this John Connor has knowledge of the events in regards to Judgment Day, Skynet. So he's obviously going to know things that other individuals in the Resistance aren't going to know, which can totally make some of his followers feel like he's a prophet, like he could see into the future. And I thought that's interesting stuff, right? And again, I love the way this film just grabs my attention, right? It grabs my attention in the initial opening through this new setting. We see Marcus on death row, and then again, boom! Right after the Marcus introduction, we get boom, an airstrike filmed through the point of view of the missile, right? Oh, wow, this is interesting. We see these choppers landing, and yeah, it just sucks me in right away. However, there is some questions in regards to some of the artistic decision making for this film. Namely, I'm speaking about the photography. The cinematography of this film is like 100% shot in monochrome, right? And I'm like, ah, man, I mean, I'm not going to say it looks bad or anything, but when we compare the depiction of the future war to Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 specifically, I mean, to me, those were like a lot of blue and purple hues, and we see the plasma rifles with the blue lasers and stuff. But here, I mean, they're kind of purplish. So let's just say purplish, bluish lasers. But here it's like everything is shot in monochrome. There's no plasma rifles. The resistance soldiers are using regular guns. And I'm just like, okay, now I understand this is a different future war than the one that was depicted in Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. However, and some argue like, look, this was supposed to be a trilogy and the plasma rifles would have played a part in the sequels, right? And I'm like, okay, but still, when I see John and the Resistance shooting T-800s, like at the end of this film, we see John Connor shooting a T-800 with normal bullets, right? And it's just like, you just want to scream at the screen, like, dude, those aren't gonna do anything, right? Like, don't you get it? Normal bullets they're gonna do jack shit to these Terminators, man. Like, why even bother, right? And then you kind of see that with these other Terminators, like the T-600s. Yes, they're more clunky. Yes, they're easier to kill. But at the same time, it's like you would think that the Resistance would come up with something in order to be more effective, right? But maybe I'm nitpicking because, again, this is a different future than the one we saw in Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. In this future, it's different, right? So we can presume that the plasma rifles haven't been made yet, etc., etc. Nevertheless, this monochrome cinematography, it's boring, to say the least. It's boring. Now, I get it. They were probably trying to go for the creation of a bleak future. However, everything is just gray to me. Everything. The only time there's even a hint of color on the screen is when we see fire, right? But other than that, everything is shot gray. And it's kind of boring. So I will say that about the cinematography. It's boring, right? Now, we see that John Connor, who is played by Christian Bale, and I will say that I like Christian Bale as John Connor. He's honestly my favorite version of John Connor. I thought he did a great job, even though he could have been given more material, but I think he did an outstanding job as John Connor. I know there's some people that disagree with that, and I disagree with them because I want to say most of the fans, it's kind of like, if you think, like, I make videos mostly Star Wars on this channel, but if you think Star Wars fans are hard, talk to Terminator fans or Alien fans, right? Terminator fans, they hate everything except Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. That's it. Like me, I'm not like that, right? Because I'm a fan of the series, right? Sure, those first two films are masterpieces, but there's still plenty to enjoy in this franchise for me. Now, most of these fans love Terminator 1 and Terminator 2, and they will tell you that Edward Furlong, he's the only true John Connor. And for me, I say, give me a break, man. Like, no way. He was just a kid, right? He was just a kid. I want to see John Connor as an adult leading the Resistance, right? And I think Christian Bale did an outstanding job as that. So we see Christian Bale, or John Connor rather, basically discover human prisoners for a special project involving a new Terminator at the beginning of this film. And here is a great scene where I can talk about how the directing is kind of haphazard. And what I mean by that is like it's just kind of sloppy and rushed without too much thought put behind it. There's a sequence in this in the beginning when John finds out about this secret project. So he goes into this underground base with some resistance soldiers, and they find a bunch of human prisoners. And then one of the guys, he's on the computer console, and then he's like looking, scanning files, scrolling down the screen. And then John Connor from like across the room, or at least like maybe 6-7 feet over this guy's shoulders, like, wait, stop, scroll down. And then we see we see the computer screen that he's talking about, and then he like the guy controlling the computer scrolls down, and it's just like a tiny little sentence, and he's like, that's it, stop right there. And that little sentence basically describes that the creation of a new Terminator is going on, right? And I'm like, come on, man. You're going to sit here and tell me that John just basically like just standing over this guy's shoulder, maybe 5-6 feet away from him, was able to pick up on that tiny little detail like from that far away, and it's just like a tiny little sentence with the font of the text like hella small, and I'm just like, oh, come on, man. And maybe I'm nitpicking, but things like this are apparent throughout this film, and I'm just like, oh, come on, man. See, James Cameron would not have done that. Like, you know, and it's just, again, it's like, I could just see the director directing the actors saying like, okay, so you're going to be scrolling down the screen, and then you, Christian, you're going to see something over this guy's shoulder, and I want you to say, hey, stop right there. And it's just like, look, dude, why, how about this? How about instead of John seeing a sentence on the computer, he sees like an image. He sees an image of a T-800 that reminds him of the T-800 that he experienced in Terminator 2 and Terminator 3. That would have made way more sense and been more believable. But I digress. Maybe I'm nitpicking, but it's just something that bugs the shit out of me when I watch this movie. Now, after this, John, we got a nice, awesome action sequence. So say what you want about this film, but I think the action sequences in this movie are outstanding. In particular, the sound effects are amazing. Like if you listen to this movie on a decent surround sound system, I mean, the sound effects are brilliant. So there's this scene where John, he has to go back up from under the layer where he made that discovery about a new Terminator, and then he hops into this helicopter. And I mean, and then basically the layer was rigged, right? And it just explodes. It's almost like nuclear explosion, right? And then the helicopter goes out of control, and then we have some awesome maneuvers with the camera spinning with the helicopter, and then the helicopter crashes, and then John goes at it with like this T-600 who's missing its lower half of its body, so it's just the torso. And I thought that was a pretty good action sequence, even though again he's using like regular bullets on this Terminator, on this T-600, but who knows, maybe they're 50 cal bullets and they're able to rip apart the T-600. I don't know, right? But that's one thing that I'm going to be saying. I mean, I think anybody that's even appreciates Terminator Salvation will admit that they wish plasma rifles were being used in this movie, right? Another thing that this film gets a lot of criticism for, and I will concede, right? I agree with this criticism, is how the Terminators keep grabbing the humans and throwing them, right? Like that T-600 that grabs John and throws him across whatever over the... Oh, he throws him against the helicopter, or he just throws him and tosses him. It's like, look, dude, Terminator's got a death grip. He could like just crush John's bones, right? So if he were to grab John by the arm, he could just like a vice, dude, just crush his arm into tiny little pieces of bone and just like rip his arm off, right? I mean, think of Terminator 1 when Arnold Schwarzenegger just punches through that one guy in the very beginning at the observatory in Terminator 1. Think of Terminator 3 when the TX just punches through the driver's seat and her arm goes through the driver and she starts driving the car through him, right? I mean, it's like these things are super strong. So for the Terminator to just toss John, I mean, he could have died right there. It's just, again, not much thought went into some of these scenes. Some of the directing is haphazard as hell, right? But nevertheless, I thought it was a great scene, except for that one little detail. Now, after this massive explosion, we get this epic performance from Sam Worthington, who plays Marcus. And I love how he just comes out of the ruins of this explosion covered in mud. And then he screams, and it almost symbolizes a type of rebirth for this character. Because when we last saw him, he was human, and he was on death row. And he was basically just giving up his body to Cyberdyne for unknown experiments. And here we have him. We don't know what's happened to him, but there's little subtle hints as to whether he's a Terminator or not. And I immediately kind of felt like he was a Terminator when he got punched in the face by these, I guess you want to say, by these rapists that were trying to rape the Blair Williams character later in the film. And he gets punched in the face, and the way that he turned his face back to the guy that basically assaulted him, it totally reminded me of something Arnold Schwarzenegger did in the previous Terminator movies. Like when a Terminator gets punched and the way that it turns its head, it's almost mechanical. That's when I first saw this movie, that's when I kind of like, is he a Terminator, right? Because you got to keep in mind there's this huge time jump that happens between him being on death row to seeing him now in the future war, and he looks like he hasn't aged a day. So that's another kind of hint as to him being a Terminator. So Sam Worthington did a pretty good job in this role, in my opinion, even though this twist at the end that he is basically an infiltrator makes no sense whatsoever. But I think he did a good job, and I especially love this character because I feel like the filmmakers touched upon themes in regards to transhumanism, and we're going to get into that very soon. Now, coming back to more criticisms in regards to the directing, to the haphazard directing, I think the worst thing in this movie is the scene when John Connor jumps out of like this helicopter in the middle of the Indian Ocean or something like that during a storm in the middle of the night, and he just jumps out of this helicopter into the ocean in an attempt to go inside this submarine. I mean, that is like literally stupid as hell. Like, that is like worse than Saturday morning cartoon bullshit. I mean, you have to really think about this. Really think about this. So, John Connor, he's on a chopper in the middle of like the Indian Ocean or something, right? It's nighttime. No daylight whatsoever. The Michael Ironside character, I guess he's another general in the Resistance, is basically like, piss off. You're not going to come into the submarine. John Connor's like, I'm going in. John, in the middle of like this storm. I mean, you see the ocean, the waves are massive and all this stuff, and it's nighttime. He like basically just jumps out of the chopper into the ocean and somehow swims into the submarine, pops open the hatch and gets in the submarine. And I'm like, of course, all that's seen off screen. All we see is him jumping off the chopper into the ocean, right? Like it's nothing. He doesn't even have scuba diver gear on. He doesn't even have oxygen. He just jumps in there. And I'm like, this is so stupid. Like, how can you not look at this scene and be like, If John did this, he would die. Like, literally, John should have died right here and Skynet should have won. Like, that's how stupid it is. And I just can't believe a room full of grown adults thought it was okay to do this. Like, it's just so haphazard. It's just so stupid, right? There's no way anybody could have done that and lived. They would have drowned easily. Not only that, I don't think there would have been any way that a human being could have jumped off a chopper into the ocean at nighttime during a storm with massive waves, swim under the ocean water in the pitch black of night, find the submarine, pop open the hatch, get inside with no oxygen, with no scuba gear or whatever. So fucking stupid that scene is. I mean, and every time I see it, it just really pisses me off because obviously I don't think these people are stupid, the filmmakers. It's just pure laziness, man. Pure laziness. And that right there is easily the worst thing in this entire movie. So anyway, once John gets into the submarine and he convenes with some of the other resistance leaders, they find out that they basically, another thing that they found out, I guess, in the that underground setting where John found out they were making a new Terminator. Another thing they discovered was that there's a new signal, right, that can be utilized in order to control the machines. And basically, the resistance is going to test it in the field later in the film in an attempt to use it to destroy Skynet or something like that. Another thing they discover is a kill list, and they find out that John is the number 2 priority on this kill list for Skynet, and that the number 1 person on the kill list is Kyle Reese, John Connor's father, right? Now, this whole signal being utilized to destroy Skynet, basically what the signal does is it renders the Terminators useless. It kind of like turns them off, right? And, you know, it turns out later in the film that Skynet purposely allowed this signal to be discovered by the resistance in order to reveal their location, right? So that's what happens later, right? You know, that plot twist, I don't mind in comparison to Marcus being this infiltrator, right? That would have been fine, just that twist alone by itself. Now, we also see Common Sense, the rapper, as part of the resistance, and I'm like, dude, why are you in this movie? Like, you are a shitty actor. Like, I don't understand the inclination for Hollywood casting rappers in roles, right, for these movies. Like, somewhere out there is hard-working, starving actors sleeping on park benches, sleeping on couches in Hollywood who want to land a role in a major film, and they have talent. But instead, we cast rappers. It's like, it just takes me out of the movie. It's like every time Common Sense says a line, it just sounds like he's about to rap. And I just want to say, like, shut up, Common. Like, seriously. And that's another thing I didn't like about this movie, man. Casting Common in this role as a resistance fighter. What a bunch of bullshit, man. It just takes me out of the movie. But anyway, back to something that I actually enjoy about this movie. And like I said, I enjoy how this film kind of expands upon and touches upon the lore of the Terminator. I love that we get to see the T-600 in action. Even though it's clunky and kind of clumsy, it's still badass and intimidating. And I love the work by Stan Winston in this movie. This was one of Stan Winston's last projects, right? So we can criticize the plot all day long, but as far as the animatronics and the creature effects for the Terminators, Stan Winston did an outstanding job, and I really appreciate it, especially the T-600 here. when the movie ends, there's even a tribute to Stan Winston. And I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate all his work. And like I said, seeing the T-600, seeing all these Terminators, these new Terminators. You got these underwater Terminators that are like eels. You got the Moto Terminators. You got these massive Terminators that basically, they're like Transformers that integrate themselves into the carriers for the human prisoners. I thought that was cool. Like, some people criticize that Terminator as being too Transformers like, but I didn't mind, right? I didn't mind because we get plenty of T-800s, we get T-600 action. I mean, we get the HKs. I mean, it's good. It's all good. I don't mind seeing new Terminators. I thought it was exciting, and I thought it was really cool. Now, we also see a new character when we meet Kyle Reese. And I think the actor that played Kyle Reese did an outstanding job. He totally reminded me of Michael Biehn's version of Kyle Reese. Like, I totally believe that this was a young version of that character. And the acting by Anton Yelchin was great. And he's passed away, so rest in peace. Passed away at a very young age, which is very unfortunate. However, I thought he did an outstanding job as Kyle Reese, and I really appreciated the efforts he put in. I think some of the mannerisms that he committed to were top notch. I think the inflection of his voice really reminded me of Michael Biehn's version of Kyle Reese. I think he did a good job, right? And there's one character that I actually really liked, right? And again, it kind of reminds me of Aliens. We have this new character, this young female girl, little girl named Star, and she totally reminds me of Newt from the Aliens movies. And I really liked it. I like that this film kind of has that Aliens vibe to it, right? The Terminators are everywhere. They could pop out at any moment. And now you got this little Newt character she's a mute. She doesn't speak. However, she lends a hand at the most crucial moments, right? I had no problem with her. Some people kind of criticize this movie. They dismiss that character. They think she's stupid because she's too much like Newt. But I just kind of looked at it like a tribute, right? I liked it. I liked it a lot. Now, one cool thing after the Marcus character touches base with Kyle Reese and Star, and he's basically brought up to current events as far as what happened, Judgment Day, and we get some decent exposition through dialogue. We there's a cool little scene where we hear the awesome Alice in Chains song Rooster being played, and Marcus kind of has a moment where he thinks back to his dark and grim past. And now every time I hear that song Rooster by Alice in Chains, I think about Terminator Salvation. In the same way, every time I hear Guns N' Roses' You Could Be Mine, I think about Terminator 2. We even hear that song, You Could Be Mine, later on in this movie, when John Connor uses the song to basically bait some of the Moto Terminators, right? So he can capture one of them, right? So I thought that was cool, man, because I love it when these movies use those classic grunge hard rock songs. I don't know, because I'm a big fan of rock, especially classic rock, grunge rock. Love Guns N' Roses, and I love Alice in Chains, but that's just a personal thing for me. Now, I really like the idea of the Resistance having an Air Force. I thought that was really cool. Really, really cool. And another thing that I thought was interesting was how the humans don't trust one another. So later on in the film, we're introduced to this character, Blair Williams, this female Air Force pilot. And basically there's a sequence where a small gang of men try to attempt to rape her, right? And it clearly shows that humans don't trust one another, right? So it's also a commentary on the human condition, how we are always at odds with one another, how we are battling for resources and all that stuff, right? Now, I just have some criticism of this Blair Williams character. I don't like her at all. I see what the filmmakers were trying to go for here. Now, I don't necessarily hate her, but I think it was poorly executed, right? And the number one thing that I have with her, that I dislike about her, is that she looks like a supermodel fresh out of Hollywood. Like, this is supposed to be a post-apocalyptic future. Go and think back to Terminator 1, where we see the human resistance living in little rat holes. They look dirty. They look filthy. But here, Blair Williams looks like a supermodel. Her hair is perfectly shampooed and conditioned. And she has perfect white teeth, right? And she just looks stunning. Like no doubt, she's a beautiful woman. I'm not saying that she's not. What I'm saying is that it feels out of place for a Terminator movie. Like, she's too good looking. In other words, man, she should look like she's been living in a goddamn rat hole for the past 10 years, but she doesn't. Instead, I feel like every time she's on screen, I'm looking at a supermodel that's about to walk down the runway, and it's unfortunate because I see what they were trying to do with this character, and I'm totally open-minded to having a female Air Force pilot. That would have been a cool idea if it had been executed better. Another thing I don't like about this character is that the relationship is way too forced with Marcus. It's like she just met this guy, right? She just meets him. And it's almost like less than 24 hours later, she's talking about, you have a good heart and all this bullshit. And I'm like, you don't even know him. What are you talking about? And then they like cuddle together, and she's and there's like this sexual attraction there, and you're like, oh, you have a good heart. And then this ties in later in the film where Marcus basically offers his life up to save John by allowing his heart be used for a heart transplant, which is a issue in it of itself, and we're definitely going to talk about that later, right? But this Blair Williams character was just poorly written, in my opinion, right? Now, this the sound effects again are awesome, especially when our main protagonists, they're being chased after they tried to get food or fuel. They try to get fuel from some humans, nomads that are hiding away from the Terminators. And again, this illustrates that the humans don't trust one another. They're fighting over resources. And then boom, all of a sudden you get this massive Terminator that's like a transformer. And you get some awesome shots and compositions in this scene. This is a great action sequence. Again, I love the continuous shot and the pandemonium and the panic and the sense of urgency. So even though I got my criticisms for this film, when it comes to the action and the tone, it hits it on the nail at times, right? And this scene, this chase scene is epic. We start out in this little like hideout where the humans, the resistance, or I guess you want to say the nomads, and are discovered, and then you see that truck get blown into the air sky high, and you see all this panic, and then it turns into this chase involving the Moto Terminators, and then Kyle, Marcus, and Star are on this truck and they're being chased, and then all of a sudden I think the HK just emerges out of nowhere on the bridge, and you just get epic action, man. It was intense as fuck, and I really loved it, really appreciated it a lot, right? Another interesting thing about this film, as far as the conflict that is among the resistance, is that you see that some of the leaders in the resistance don't care about human prisoners. They find them expendable. They find them as collateral damage. And this ties back into Terminator 2 and other themes throughout the series where the humans are trying not to be like the Terminators. Basically, they don't want to make cold, calculated decisions like machines, right? And John Connor, he has reservations about his superiors, especially when they disregard the lives of the human prisoners. And this comes into play later in the final act of the film as well. Now, when Marcus and Blair try to return to the resistance base, this is the sequence in which Marcus finds out that he is a cyborg when he steps on a magnetic mine, which shouldn't go off if a human is walking in the minefield, right? But it does go off because he's made of metal, right? He's machine. And this opens up a whole new can of worms as far as themes pertaining to transhumanism, right? And I particularly enjoy the scene where John Connor has a conversation with Marcus, and John is kind of appalled by Marcus, and he says to him, "You think that you're a human?" So it's very interesting to see a Terminator, quote unquote, that doesn't know it's a Terminator, right? He doesn't know that he's a cyborg until now. And I have to say, Sam Worthington's acting, he does a very good job, especially in this scene where he finds out that he's a Terminator. He's all blown up. His flesh is torn, and you see his machine parts and his heart, and you just see he's all messed up. And you can really see the sadness in his eyes. He does an excellent job with his acting in conveying how torn he is, right? And that scene where Common is shooting him up and he just screams, "No!" And then Blair comes in and shoots him as well, even though it's just a cover because she's about to let him go. And you just see the apathy in his face. You know, he's just defeated. He is completely self-defeated. And I really enjoy this whole transhumanism theme that we got going on here. And I enjoy when John, he's telling Marcus, "You killed my father, Kyle Reese. We've been at war since before any of us were born," right? And then immediately when he says Kyle Reese, this is when Marcus tells him, "I was with Kyle Reese. I was just with Kyle Reese, and he's been captured by Skynet. And he's on his way to a transport in Northern California," or whatever, right? Skynet headquarters in Northern California, right? And this leads us into the last act of the film. And, you know, I want to say that it was very nice to hear Linda Hamilton's voice. She came back to do some of these voice recordings that John is listening to, and I really appreciated that. I thought that was a nice little Easter egg. That was really cool. And when Blair Williams sets Marcus free in an attempt to escape, the action there was amazing. I really like this film for the way it incorporates a lot of its helicopter action, right? And especially when they blow up. I mean, it looks like napalm blowing up, almost like a scene out of Apocalypse Now. And I really enjoy seeing all the choppers. And again, even though the cinematography is bland as hell with its monochrome, its excessive use of monochrome, that scene at night when they drop that napalm-like stuff and all the trees are on fire and you see the helicopter just coming in, hovering, looking for Marcus, that was an epic shot. I really love that. And then this is where we see Marcus and John agree to work together. So Marcus is going to go and find Kyle Reese and basically let John know where Kyle is deep in Skynet's headquarters. And I just got to say, like, after this scene, there's a corny thing that I really didn't appreciate. I mean, it's small, but I gotta comment on it. And it's where John Connor says, "I'll be back." That was completely unnecessary and stupid. Like, I don't know, like, why would you do that? Like, why do you need to, why does the series, this film in particular, have to be aware of itself? Like, this is a Terminator movie. And in Terminator movies, people say, I'll be back. You know, it's like, no, that's not how it works, man. That's an iconic line from Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't want to hear Christian Bale say, I'll be back. That was stupid as hell. Okay. Now, after that, Marcus goes to Skynet, and this is where we get the plot twist that, oh, he was an infiltrator this whole time, and he succeeded unknowingly, and he's all torn because he's like, no, I don't want to be an infiltrator. I don't want to work for Skynet. That's how he feels. But then Skynet, or the interface that represents Skynet, tells him like, no, we programmed you to find John and to find Kyle Reese. I mean, that's just complete bullshit, right? That was just so contrived and poorly written and didn't need to be in this film. I did not need this twist because it just doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. And the way the characters move from point A to point B, as far as in the third act, namely John Connor, you know, basically what I'm trying to say is the way John Connor infiltrates or gets into the Skynet base was just so ridiculously easy. I mean, he basically just hops on a motorcycle and just like just waltzes in, and that's it. And I'm like, what, dude? Like, come on, man. Like, this is supposed to be Skynet headquarters. It should be hard as hell to get into this thing. I mean, Jesus Christ. It's hard enough to get into like wait, think about Cyberdyne. It was hella hard to get into Cyberdyne. It had security when our heroes in Terminator 2 went in there. I mean, look what happened, man. All the police showed up. It seemed like all the police in Los Angeles showed up because the security guards pressed the button, right? And we're like, look, we're being broken into, right? But no, this is Skynet headquarters in Northern California, and John can just ride his little motorcycle in there and go in there undetected. Like, dude, come on, man. You're going to tell me they don't have infrared or cameras, motion sensor cameras, etc., etc.? I mean, what this film needed was another rewrite. Because there's some great ideas in this movie. There's some great action sequences in this movie. The tone of this film is perfect. It fits with the seriousness of Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. However, the writing is bad in some areas. Like, all it needed to be was just rewritten, right? The ideas are there, the concepts are there, and they work, but the logistics needed to be executed better. The logistics behind how characters get from point A to point B, it just needed to be completely rewritten. I mean, and it's not that hard. I mean, if you just sit back and look at the film, the way John gets into Skynet, like look, it's not that big of a plot issue, right? I mean, it just needed a little bit of logic written behind it. But you can't just have him walk in there. I mean, that undermines the whole threat of Skynet and the Terminators, which this film has been doing really well up to this point. I mean, you really feel, like I said, it's almost like this is the aliens of the Terminator series. You could have called it Terminators, because you feel like around every corner there could potentially be a Terminator, right? Terminators everywhere. The threat is everywhere. But when John actually goes to Skynet headquarters, it's like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna walk in here, try to find Kyle. No problem, man. So anyway, John rescues Kyle Reese, and it's nice to see John finally reunited with his father, at least in this timeline. And it was a trip because he's seen his father when he was a young boy, right? And I think that's pretty interesting, right? Almost on some Back to the Future kind of hype. And that was really, really, really well done scene. And right here we find out that the signal that the Resistance basically found and thought was the key to defeating Skynet was complete bullshit. That it was actually purposely leaked to the Resistance so that Skynet can track them down, right? And again, I think this may be a little bit contrived because I don't exactly remember how in the very beginning of this movie the Resistance were stumbled across that underground lair where they found the plans for a new Terminator and this signal or something like that. So it's just like, I mean, I'm a little kind of confused. Again, the movie needs a rewrite. Basically, what I'm trying to say is when you do something like, say, Skynet was behind everything, you really got to go back and make sure it all makes sense. Because it kind of leaves me scratching my head. Like, really? Like, so Skynet basically led the Resistance to find this signal? Okay. All right. I mean, it's not the worst thing about this film. So here in this Skynet headquarters where John finally finds Kyle Reese, we get to see the T-800, right? So this is supposed to be the same model that was seen in Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. And it's the T-800. It's Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I just got to say, man, like, you know, I absolutely understand what they were going for in this movie. And I really appreciate it. I love seeing the classic T-800 back in action again in this movie. And I love that we're not getting teased. We actually see the thing without its flesh, right? And full-blown T-800 endoskeleton, man. Beautiful. However, the CGI that tried to recreate Arnold Schwarzenegger's face, oh my God, man. It's laughable, dude. It does not look like Arnold Schwarzenegger in the slightest. I don't know if they did that on purpose because they didn't want to do an exact depiction of the actor. Maybe they didn't get permission. I don't know. All I know is that dude does not look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger's like cousin or like long lost half brother or something, man. It's hella funny. Right? But you know they're trying to convey to the audience like, no, this is Arnold Schwarzenegger. Dung, 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 dung. And I just laugh every time I see its face because he just looks so goofy, right? He just 100% looks nothing like Arnold Schwarzenegger. He looks nothing like him whatsoever. It's so funny. And unintentionally funny. It's unintentionally funny. But anyway, so Marcus ultimately ends up saving John Connor. I mean, I like the little showdown between the T-800 and John. And we see John and his father, Kyle, try to get away from this T-800. And we see Marcus go at it with this T-800. And then John is stabbed right through the chest by the T-800, and then Marcus comes and kills or destroys the T-800. That was epic action, and we also get to see how John got his scar that we saw in the beginning of Terminator 2. That was all great stuff. Now, I gotta comment on this whole heart transplant stuff. Right, so John basically needs a heart transplant because of his injury that was inflicted upon him by the T-800. So Marcus wants to take it upon himself to sacrifice his life to save John Connor. Now, on paper, it's a great idea. But as far as execution, again, that key word, haphazard. It's haphazard. It's executed in such a haphazard manner, man. Like, first of all, okay, they're going to do a heart transplant from Marcus's heart to John Connor, right? Dude, you can't just say like, oh, take my heart, dude. Take my heart. Like, okay, for sure. Thanks, man. Thanks, bro. It's like, look, dude, he has to have the same blood type. He has to make sure that all these medical requirements are met, right? You can't just say, oh, take my heart. Oh, right on, bro. Thanks, dude. I appreciate the heart, bro. Like, dude, like, come on, man. Like, seriously? Like, I understand what you were going for, but again, the logistics. Come on, can I get some intellectual calculation when it comes to the formation of this plot? Another thing, it's like a heart transplant in the middle of the desert. Like, there was no reason why this scene had to be shot in the middle of the desert. You could have like cut from our resistance heroes escaping Skynet to some underground medical base, and nobody would have gave a shit. No one would have said nothing, and it would have been like, okay, they're gonna do a heart transplant in a medical facility. Okay, understood, man. But it's like, again, with the haphazard execution. I get the idea, and I think it's a nice idea because this is a way that the character Marquise finds redemption, right? This is the way that he is able to regain his humanity after he's gone through so much, and I like the idea very much. But it's executed like a poorly written Saturday morning cartoon. And that brings us to the end of the movie, right? I mean, I like the voiceover that Christian Bale does about no fate but what we make it. Bringing it back to Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 and giving a middle finger to the message from Terminator 3, which I absolutely loathe, right? There's, Terminator 3 was trying to say, oh, it's destiny. You can't stop Judgment Day. It's your destiny. There's absolutely nothing you can do. It's inevitable, right? But here, again, I love the concept. That's the heart of this series. There's no fate but what we make. And then, lastly, like I previously stated, we get a nice send-off to Stan Winston, creator of the Terminator animatronics and all that stuff, man. And I absolutely love Stan Winston's work, so I'm very appreciative of seeing this dedication to him. And that brings us to the end of this review, an in-depth analysis for Terminator Salvation. Now, I really, really enjoyed this movie. I enjoy it. I enjoy it for the action and for the serious tone, which was missing from Terminator 3. And I really appreciate it for that. However, some of the logistics as far as the plot are just poorly written, right? I mean, it's just poorly done. It's haphazard in some areas. However, to say that this movie just outright sucks and is no good is unfair, right? I enjoy watching this movie. It just needed another rewrite. The ideas are there. The ideas are good, but some of it is just poorly executed. But at the end of the day, it's an entertaining film. It really is. And it matches the tone. It fits with the series. I just wish it had another rewrite. That being said, I think I want to give this movie, like, a part of me wants to give this movie a C+ because of all these logistical issues with the plot. And another part of me wants to give it a B- because I enjoy the serious tone and the action and all that stuff. And sometimes people want to be really hard on these Terminator films, right? And why? It's because Terminator 1 and Terminator 2, we hold it dear to our hearts. But I'm going to give Terminator Salvation a B- because I see the ideas that they were attempting and I appreciate them. I love the action. I love the tone of this movie. It's serious. And I think that goes a long way with me because moving forward, Terminator 3 was goofy in some areas and it just didn't feel as intense. And the odd thing is that this film was PG-13 and felt more serious than Terminator 3, which is rated R, right? And then talking about Terminator Genesis, that movie felt like a comic book movie. I mean, the tone is not serious at all for that film. So because of that, I appreciate Terminator Salvation. I really think that they were putting in a serious effort, even though they could have done a second rewrite. They needed to think about this plot a little bit more. So I got to give them a little bit of credit for effort. The effort was there. I really believe the heart was there in this film, right? And the funny thing is that after the disaster that Terminator Dark Fate was, And some people really didn't like Terminator Genesis. I always hear among the fans, oh man, I want a movie about the future war. Why can't we get a movie about the future war? Dude, you did get a movie about the future war, but you didn't come out and support it. We were going to get a whole trilogy. We were going to get a Terminator Salvation trilogy. And even though this film had its shortcomings, I would have enjoyed or wanted to see Terminator Salvation 2 and 3, the trilogy. I mean, even though this film had its shortcomings, they could have improved on the ideas. They could have brought in the plasma rifles. They could have listened to the criticism, the feedbacks from the fans, and given us what we wanted. Because honestly, I think Terminator Salvation is the best sequel after Terminator 2, outside of the TV show. So I'm going to say Terminator Salvation is better, easily better than Terminator 3, easily better than Terminator Genesis, and a million times better than Terminator Dark Fate. And because of that, I think it deserves a little bit of credit, right? So I'm going to give it a B-. Thank you guys for listening to this review and in-depth analysis. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and share. Take care, people. And last but not least, one love.